My stepmother was still holding the wine glass when the notary said the words that ended her. Not raised, not angry, just holding it the way she'd held some version of that glass at every family function since I was 14, the stem pinched between two fingers like she could strangle it politely. We were in Bartlett and Klein's conference room on the 9th floor, and my brother Marcus hadn't been inside a room with our family in 6 years, not since Dad's funeral, when Diane told him in front of the pastor that he was, in her exact words, a stain nobody needed to explain twice. Now the estate attorney was sliding a single page across the table, and the number on it was $100,000, and it was going to Marcus. "That's impossible," Diane said. Her voice had the calm of someone who still believed the room would fix itself around her. Family takes care of family. He wasn't even at the hospital. Nobody moved. I want to back up because you need to understand what 6 years of silence actually costs before you understand what it means to watch someone lose everything by accident in front of witnesses because of a mistake she made trying to punish somebody else. My name is Vanessa Cole. I'm a family law compliance analyst, which is a phrase that makes people's eyes glaze over at parties until I explain what I actually do, which is read the documents nobody else reads all the way through. Trust instruments, codicils, beneficiary designations, the boilerplate paragraphs everyone skims because they assume boilerplate means nothing. I've built a career on the assumption that it never means nothing. Somewhere in every long document, there's a sentence that changes who gets what, and most people never find it because they stop reading at the part that upsets them. Grandma Eleanor died in March. She was 81, sharp until the last 6 months, and she loved my brother the way she loved everybody who disappointed the rest of the family, without conditions, without a scoreboard. Marcus dropped out of law school at 24, got a girl pregnant he didn't marry, and disappeared into a decade of odd jobs and worse decisions before he cleaned himself up on his own, with no help from anyone in this family except Grandma, who wired him rent money twice and never told a soul. Diane found out about the second wire and turned it into a referendum on his character that lasted a year. That was the fight at the funeral. That was the last time anyone spoke to him. Grandma updated her estate plan 4 times in the last decade of her life. I know because I was the one who filed most of the paperwork for her, unofficially, as a favor, because she trusted me more than she trusted her own lawyer to explain what a clause actually did once it was translated out of legal Latin. The final version, the one that mattered, included a no contest clause, in terrorem if you want the formal name. It says that if any beneficiary formally challenges the validity of the will or any part of it, they forfeit whatever they were left under it. It's meant to keep people from suing each other over a dead woman's wishes. Most families never trigger it. Most families don't have Diane. The trouble started 3 weeks after the funeral in a shared cloud folder Grandma's attorney had set up for the family to track probate filings. I checked it out of habit more than suspicion. There was an email thread inside it, forwarded without a note, that Diane had apparently meant to send privately to her own lawyer and had accidentally CC'd to the folder instead. In it, she was formally petitioning to have a 2-year-old codicil invalidated, the one that left Marcus a token $25,000 bequest, in recognition, Grandma had written, of the son who never stopped trying. Diane's petition called it the product of diminished capacity. She wanted it struck. I read the email twice, standing in my kitchen with my phone in one hand and the kettle screaming behind me. I had found it. Not by accident, exactly, though the forwarding error was Diane's mistake and not my search. I'd been checking that folder every few days since the funeral, the way I'd check any client file where I already suspect someone is about to do something they can't undo. And there it was, sitting between a scanned property tax bill and an email chain about cemetery plot maintenance, wearing a subject line that just said, "Re-draft, do not forward yet." She had forwarded it anyway, to the wrong address, and the wrong address happened to be the one thing in this family that never stopped watching. If her petition succeeded, Marcus lost $25,000. If it failed, under the no contest clause Grandma's attorney had written into the master document, Diane would lose everything she was left under the will, the house, the investment accounts, all of it, and it would flow, per Grandma's own contingency language, to the next beneficiary in line under that same disputed section, which was Marcus. I called the estate attorney the next morning, not as family, but the way I would call a client's counsel, which is to say I asked exactly one question and let the silence answer the rest of it. Mr. Bartlett confirmed what I already suspected. Diane's petition wasn't an informal complaint. It was a formal will contest, filed with the probate court, under her own name with her own signature on it. She had triggered the clause herself. She just didn't know it yet. I didn't tell her. That's the part people always want to argue with me about later, in the comments, in therapy, at dinner. I didn't warn my stepmother that she was about to lose $400,000 trying to take $25,000 away from a man she'd spent 6 years pretending didn't exist. I want to be honest about why. It wasn't cruelty. It was that I'd spent a decade learning that some people don't stop a bad decision because you warn them. They stop it because the warning gives them time to build a story around it, a story where they're still the reasonable one. I didn't want Diane time to build a story. I wanted the document to speak for itself, in a room, in front of everyone who'd spent 6 years agreeing with her. My therapist, Dr. Ansel, asked me a question in our session that week that I still think about. She asked whether I was protecting Marcus or protecting the version of myself that used to apologize for existing every time Diane raised her voice at a dinner table. I didn't have a clean answer. I still don't. What I told her was that for 6 years, I'd watched my brother get erased a little more at every holiday, a line item quietly removed from a family budget nobody voted on. And I was tired of being the only one who remembered he used to be at the table at all. My friend, Priya, put it more simply, over wine that didn't come from a stem Diane would recognize as acceptable. "You're not doing anything to her," Priya said. "You're just going to stop doing something for her. That's not revenge, Vanessa. That's math." The next 2 months were a slow-motion collision I watched from a front-row seat nobody else knew I had. Diane's petition needed a hearing date, which needed Cousin Renee's signature on an affidavit corroborating concerns about Eleanor's state of mind in her final year. Renee, who owed a bookie in 3 figures she couldn't say out loud at family dinner, and who signed whatever Diane put in front of her because Diane had quietly covered 2 of those debts already. Renee's affidavit called Grandma confused and easily influenced during a period when Grandma had, in fact, been beating Diane in gin rummy every Tuesday with a memory sharp enough to recite the exact debts everyone in this family owed each other going back a decade. Cousin Todd needed something too. He was mid-custody fight with his ex over their son, and Diane had floated, more than once, that a properly distributed estate, meaning one where Marcus got nothing, would fund the retainer Todd's lawyer wanted up front. Todd signed a second affidavit. He didn't ask me for advice, which was smart because I'd have told him exactly what his signature was about to cost him, and he wasn't ready to hear it. Cousin Patricia didn't need anything. Patricia just liked being on the side that won. She'd ordered the $800 bottle at the family strategy dinner Diane hosted at the club that April. Didn't check the price, didn't ask, just told the waiter to bring the good one, the way she always did when she assumed someone else's inheritance was picking up the tab. It usually was. That night, it was still technically Grandma's money, sitting in an account Diane hadn't been clear to touch yet. I sat at that dinner and ate a small plate of the wrong food and said almost nothing because I was the only person at the table who knew that everyone raising a glass to finally correcting Eleanor's mistake was raising it to their own disqualification. The dinner ran long. Diane had booked the private room at the club, the one with the brass fixtures and the fireplace nobody ever lit in April, and she stood at the head of the table with a legal pad she never once looked down at because she already knew what she wanted to say. She'd rehearsed it. I could tell by the rhythm. the same rhythm she'd used at the funeral, at Christmas the year Marcus first stopped coming, at every gathering where she needed the room to agree with her before anyone had time to think it through on their own. She said, "I know some of you think this is harsh," she said, turning the stem of her glass a slow half circle on the tablecloth. "But your grandmother wasn't herself at the end. We all saw it. And family takes care of family, which means we don't let one person's confusion undo what the rest of us worked for." Renee nodded fast, the way people nod when they've already decided not to think about it further. She had her phone face down on the table, but her thumb kept finding the edge of it anyway, tapping a rhythm against the case that had nothing to do with anything being said. Todd didn't nod. He stared at the tablecloth like it owed him money, which in a way, through his lawyer, it did. Patricia asked whether the club did a tasting menu. I watched Renee's phone the whole dinner without meaning to. It buzzed twice, face down, and both times she flipped it just enough to see the name, then set it back down without answering. I didn't know yet what the debt looked like from the inside. I found out later it looked exactly like that. A phone you can't stop checking and can't stand to answer, held the same way Diane held a glass she wasn't drinking from, a habit standing in for a feeling nobody at that table was allowed to say out loud. I didn't say anything that night. I told myself it wasn't my place yet, that the document would do the talking eventually, and anything I said now would get filed away as bias, a sister protecting her brother, easy to dismiss. That was true. It was also, if I'm honest, easier. Silence has always come naturally to me in rooms like that one. It's a skill I inherited the same way Marcus inherited whatever made him keep trying long after everyone stopped expecting him to. Diane said the phrase that night again, leaning across the table towards me specifically, like she suspected I needed convincing. "Family takes care of family, Vanessa. I don't expect you to understand loyalty the way the rest of us do." She'd said some version of it at the funeral 6 years ago, aimed at Marcus like a verdict. She said it now, aimed at me like a threat with better manners. I noted it. I didn't answer it. Not yet. Somewhere in the middle of that spring, Grandma's longtime cleaning woman, Miss Alvarez, mentioned to me in passing, unprompted, no stake in any of it, just making conversation while she watered the porch plants at the lake house one last time before the estate closed the place up, that Eleanor had asked her, months before she died, to help carry a box of old bank statements up from the basement. Statements Eleanor said she wanted, in case anyone ever tried to say I didn't know my own mind. I never found out exactly what was in that box. It got folded into the broader estate inventory before I thought to ask, and I've never brought myself to request it back out of storage, because some things are better left as evidence you know exists, rather than evidence you've actually had to read. Miss Alvarez didn't know why she was telling me. She just thought it was a strange thing an old woman does, and thought I might find it interesting, and left it at that, and drove home, and never appeared in another version of this story again. That's the thing about the people who aren't fighting over anything. They see more than anyone arguing ever does, and they almost never think what they saw was important enough to mention twice. There was a complication I hadn't accounted for, and I want to include it because leaving it out would make this sound cleaner than it was. Grandma's attorney called me in May, uneasy, still not fully trusting that I hadn't inherited some of Diane's habits along with her last name. I told him only that something was moving, that he should keep his phone on, that he shouldn't do anything, say anything, or contact anyone in the family before the hearing. He didn't ask why. That's its own kind of trust, the kind you get from someone who's been burned enough times to know better than to want the details before he needs them. There was a moment around day 7 when I almost told Priya everything, just to have someone else carrying the weight of it. We were at her apartment, and I had the manila folder, my own copy, not Bartlett's, spread open on her coffee table, the corners already starting to soften from how many times I'd opened and closed it that week. Priya looked at the notary certificate upside down and asked what I was even looking for. "A date," I said. "9 days? That's the whole case?" That seems like a strange thing to hinge $100,000 on. It's not strange, I said. It's just small. Most of the important things are. She didn't push further, which is the specific gift Priya has always given me. She asks exactly one clarifying question and then lets the silence do whatever work I still need done. I kept scrolling the county clerk's database on my phone until the screen dimmed twice for inactivity and I had to unlock it again, my thumb leaving a smear across the glass I didn't bother wiping off because I was 3 names deep in a filing index that hadn't been alphabetized correctly since the office switched software in 2021. Diane, meanwhile, had stopped being subtle. She called a second family strategy gathering in May, this one at the lake house, Grandma's lake house technically, still part of the estate, which meant Diane was hosting a meeting to discuss disinheriting her stepson in a house she did not yet legally have the right to use for that purpose. Nobody pointed that out. I noted it and said nothing, the way I'd been saying nothing for 2 months, collecting silence the way other people collect grievances. The lake house still smelled like Grandma's dish soap, lemon and something floral underneath it. And I stood in the kitchen where she used to let me lick the bowl after she made her lemon cake, and I listened to Diane in the next room tell Todd's ex-wife's lawyer over speakerphone that the estate should be settled favorably within the month once the codicil issue resolves. She was making promises about money she already had procedurally forfeited, and she didn't know it yet. And there was a version of that afternoon where I could have stopped her from embarrassing herself further, and I chose not to, because I had spent 6 years watching her embarrass my brother on purpose, in public, without once offering him the mercy of a warning. Renee cornered me by the dock. She had her phone in her hand again, screen cracked in the corner from some earlier drop she'd never gotten around to fixing, and she was thumbing at the crack absently as she talked, the way you'd worry a hangnail. "You've been quiet," she said. "You're usually not quiet." "I've been reading," I said. "Reading what?" "Everything," I said, and I meant it more literally than she understood, and I watched her decide not to ask what that meant, because some part of her already suspected the answer wouldn't help her case. Todd found me on the porch a little later, still chewing on whatever sentence he hadn't said in the conference round the first time and wasn't ready to say now either. "If this goes the way Diane thinks it's going to go," he said, "it solves a real problem for me. You understand that, right? This isn't just about being petty toward Marcus. Some of us actually need this." It was the closest anyone in that family came to honesty that spring, and I almost respected it. "I understand," I told him. "I don't think you understand what you actually signed, though." He didn't ask what I meant. Nobody in that family asked me follow-up questions anymore. I'd become the relative you talked around instead of to, which suited me fine, because it meant nobody was watching closely enough to notice what I already knew. The hearing was scheduled for the 2nd week of June, back in the same conference room where Grandma's will had first been read. Diane arrived 12 minutes early, wearing the navy suit she wore to things she wanted to win, holding a wine glass that hadn't been filled with anything, out of habit, the way some people hold a phone they're not using. Renee sat 2 seats down, thumbing the screen of her own phone compulsively, refreshing something that wasn't there. Todd came alone, jaw tight, the muscle in it working like he was chewing on a sentence he hadn't decided to say out loud yet. Patricia came in 10 minutes late with a coffee that cost more than the parking. Marcus came in wearing the only suit he owned, which fit him better than it had 6 years ago, and he sat down across from Diane without a word, and Diane's mouth pulled into something that was not quite a smile. "I want to be clear," she said, before Mr. Bartlett had even opened his folder, "that this isn't personal. It's about protecting what my husband built." Mr. Bartlett cleared his throat instead of answering her and opened the manila folder in front of him, the same folder I'd watched him carry into every meeting for 3 months, its corner worn soft from handling. He read the ruling first, the way he'd been asked to. The court had found the codicil valid. Diane's petition to invalidate it was denied. Diane exhaled, visibly, like she'd expected exactly that, and was ready to move past it. Fine, she said. Then we proceed as planned. There's a second matter, Mr. Bartlett said. Under Section 14 of Eleanor Cole's will, any beneficiary who formally contests the validity of a testamentary instrument forfeits their interest under that instrument. Mrs. Cole's petition constitutes a formal contest as defined in that section. The room went very quiet. I didn't contest the will, Diane said. I contested a codicil. The codicil is part of the will, Mr. Bartlett said. Section 14 doesn't distinguish. I watched something move across Diane's face that I'd never seen on her before. Not anger. Calculation. Running out of road. That clause exists to stop lawsuits between siblings, she said. It never meant to apply to me. I'm the widow. I'm the one who held this family together. The clause doesn't have an exception for that, Mr. Bartlett said, gently, the way you tell someone their test came back positive. Diane's card was declined. I don't mean that literally, not yet anyway, though it would be, twice, within the month, at a boutique she'd been quietly propping up with money that was never technically hers to spend. I mean it the way it needed to be said in that room, the story she told herself for 6 years, the one where loyalty was a leash she got to hold and never wear, had just been formally, procedurally, irreversibly declined. She's lying, Renee said suddenly, pointing at nothing, at the folder, at the air. No one did anything to your aunt, Mr. Bartlett said. Your aunt filed a petition. The consequence is written into the document she was left under. It's been there since 2019. Todd stood up so fast his chair scraped the floor, loud in the small room. So what, he gets everything now? For nothing? For 6 years of nothing? Family takes care of family, I said. I hadn't planned to say it there, exactly there, in that exact room, but it came out of me the way a held breath finally does, and I said it looking at Diane, not at Todd, because Todd wasn't the one who'd coined the phrase and worn it like armor for 6 years. Diane looked at me like I'd struck her. That's what you told him at the funeral, I said. That's what you told me at dinner in April. So take care of him. He's family. That's the whole clause you've been quoting at us since I was 14. It just finally applies to somebody other than the person saying it. Nobody in the room defended her. That was its own kind of collapse, quieter than the money. Near the door, Mr. Okafor, the notary who'd witnessed the original signing 3 years earlier and had been called back only to confirm his own commission dates for the record, said nothing at all. He just closed his folder, looked once at Diane, and said to no one in particular, the witnessing was proper, in the flat voice of a man confirming a fact and declining to have an opinion about what it meant to the people in the room. It landed harder than anything Todd had shouted. Diane tried one more angle, the way people always do at the exact moment there's nothing left. She turned to Marcus and her voice went soft, the way it used to go soft at church in front of people she wanted to impress. You wouldn't take this from me. You wouldn't do that to your father's memory. I'm not taking anything, Marcus said. It was the first full sentence he'd spoken since he sat down. You gave it to me. You just didn't mean to. She set the empty wineglass down on the conference table, carefully, the way you set down something you're afraid might otherwise shatter in your hand. And for the first time in 6 years, I watched Diane Cole leave a room without the last word. Patricia lingered by the door on her way out, coffee cup long since abandoned somewhere in the building, and said, to nobody, in the flat tone of someone recalculating a seating chart, "Well, this changes the holidays." Nobody answered her either. Todd left without looking at Marcus. Renee stayed a beat too long, opened her mouth like she might say something to me, and then didn't, which was the first correct decision I'd seen her make all spring. Marcus and I stood in the hallway afterward, by the elevator, neither of us reaching to press the button yet. "Did you know?" he asked, quiet. "The whole time?" "Not the whole time," I said. "Since the folder. 2 months." 2 months. he repeated, and I watched him do the math on it, watched him land somewhere between grateful and stung, because 2 months is a long time to carry a secret that belongs, in part, to someone else's life. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Because if I'd told you, you'd have called her, I said, and she would have found a lawyer smart enough to help her withdraw the petition before the hearing, and none of this happens. You needed to not know. I'm sorry that's what it took. He was quiet for a moment, turning that over. Then he pressed the elevator button and said, I believe you, which wasn't the same as forgiving me for it, but was, I think, as close as either of us needed to get that day. The weeks after were smaller than the hearing, in the way that real endings usually are. There was no scene at the house, no dramatic locksmith changing the deadbolt. There was a second, quieter meeting where Diane's own attorney, visibly uncomfortable, confirmed there were no grounds for appeal, because the language of Section 14 was as unambiguous as documents get. Renee stopped answering my calls, then started again 3 weeks later, apologizing in a text that said more about her fear of being cut off from Marcus's new position in the family than any real remorse. I should have asked more questions before I signed anything, she wrote, which was true, and also not an apology, not really. Todd never apologized at all. He asked 2 times whether Marcus might be willing to help out with the retainer since he had it now anyway. Family takes care of family. He actually wrote that in a text, forgetting or not caring that the phrase had already been buried in a conference room with his aunt's name on the coffin. Patricia never mentioned it again, ordered another bottle at the next family gathering she wasn't technically invited to, and left before the check came, same as always. Diane's boutique closed in September. It had been failing for 2 years before any of this happened. Her lawyer confirmed later, in an unrelated filing Vanessa had no business reading and read anyway, that Diane had been personally guaranteeing its lease payments out of what she assumed would be a much larger inheritance. The estate wasn't the cause of her downfall, it just removed the thing that had been quietly holding it up. Marcus used part of the money to pay off the last of his old debts in full, the ones that had followed him from the decade Diane liked to summarize as everything wrong with him. He used another part to start paying his daughter's mother real, consistent child support for the first time in 3 years, unprompted, before anyone made him. He didn't buy anything showy. He ordered a coffee, black, no room, at the diner where we met the week after the hearing, and he held the cup with both hands the way he used to hold things when he was younger and scared of dropping them, except this time, nothing was shaking. I keep waiting to feel like I won something, he told me. You didn't win anything, I said. You just stopped losing by default. He turned the coffee cup a quarter turn on the table, the same absent motion Diane used to make with the wine glass she wasn't drinking from. And I noticed it and didn't say anything, because some habits move sideways through a family whether anyone intends them to or not. I keep thinking about the 25,000, he said, the number she was originally trying to take. If she'd just let it go, if she'd just let Grandma have that one soft spot for me, she'd still have everything else. I know. That's the part I can't get past. She didn't lose the house because she was cruel. She lost it because she couldn't stand losing, even a little, even once, even to someone she'd already decided didn't count. I didn't correct him. I don't think there was anything to correct. Diane had spent 6 years building a story where generosity toward Marcus was a kind of theft from everyone else, and the math of that story only ever worked if his share stayed at 0. The moment Grandma insisted on $25,000 of soft spot, the whole story needed defending, and defending it was the one move the document itself couldn't survive. I think about that folder a lot. The one Mr. Bartlett kept carrying into every meeting, its corner worn soft. Somewhere in the middle of it was a clause that sat quietly for 6 years, written by a woman who never raised her voice at anyone, doing more damage to the people who wronged her son than any confrontation ever could have. Grandma didn't write Section 14 as a trap for Diane. She wrote it because she'd read enough wills go bad in her own life to know that some families need a mechanism, not a moral, to actually stop hurting each other. She was right. The moral never would have worked on Diane. The mechanism didn't need her to agree with it. I used to think loyalty in this family was a performance you gave to the loudest person in the room. I don't think that anymore. I think loyalty is just the willingness to read the whole document, even the parts that are boring, even the parts that don't seem to matter yet, because somewhere in there is the sentence that decides who actually gets protected when it counts. Diane spent 6 years deciding who deserved protection based on who was still useful to her. I spent 6 years deciding to actually finish reading. Only one of those turned out to matter in a room with a clause like Section 14 in it. Renee still texts me sometimes. Small things, a birthday, a meme, nothing that acknowledges what her signature cost her aunt or what it almost cost my brother. I answer most of them, not because I've forgiven the affidavit exactly, but because I understand now that some people sign things because they're drowning somewhere else entirely. And punishing them forever for the paperwork doesn't fix the water. I don't extend that same patience to Diane, and I've stopped feeling like I owe an explanation for the difference. Some debts get repaid. Some just get closed. I kept one of Grandma's things after the estate finished settling. Not money. We'd already split what there was to split. Cleanly, the way documents make things clean, whether or not the people involved feel that way. I kept the small enamel ring box she used to keep on her dresser, chipped along one edge from some fall decades before I was born, empty of anything valuable, and full, somehow, of exactly the kind of quiet, unglamorous permanence she spent her whole estate plan trying to protect. It sits on my own dresser now. I open it sometimes for no reason at all, the way you check on something just to confirm it's still there. I saw Diane once more at the courthouse, months later, filing something unrelated. She didn't look at me. I didn't expect her to. There wasn't a scene, there wasn't a line. There was just 2 women standing near a metal detector who used to eat holiday dinners at the same table and now had nothing left to say to each other that a document hadn't already said better. I let her go first through the line, not out of kindness, out of the same procedural habit that had gotten me through the last 6 months. Some things aren't worth contesting, and knowing which ones is the whole skill. If there's one thing I'd want anyone watching this to actually take with them, it's this. Before you challenge a will, a trust, or any part of an estate plan, find out whether it contains a no contest clause, sometimes called an in terrorem clause, and understand exactly what contest means under that specific document, because it is not always limited to the section you think you're arguing about. These clauses are legal in most states, though a handful limit or refuse to enforce them, and the difference between a clause that holds and one that doesn't can be a single sentence buried on a page nobody reads twice. If you are ever the beneficiary of an estate and you believe part of it is wrong, call a probate attorney before you file anything yourself and ask them one specific question. Does contesting this cost me anything I'm not contesting on purpose? It took me 11 sleepless nights and a notary's commission filing at 40% Zoom to answer that question for someone else. You can get the answer from a professional in one phone call for a lot less than $100,000. If this story helped you understand how these clauses actually work, tell me in the comments. I read everyone, and I'll answer the ones I can without giving anyone free legal advice they should be paying an actual attorney for.